hundreds of thousands of dead Ukrainian and Russian soldiers, and all their sons and daughters and aunts and mothers and fathers and uncles and cousins and friends are in this room with us today. The dead soldiers haunt me. The surviving loved ones haunt me. I feel their pain. I feel their presence in this room, and it is haunting.
That, ladies and gentlemen, is the ever-popular Roger Waters, Pink Floyd's grand conceptualist, the driving force behind such albums as The Dark Side of the Moon, Wish You Were Here, and The Wall. Roger left Pink Floyd in 1983 after the final cut, but he never stopped and has been touring the world with his own band since. Maybe most importantly, Rogers has been advocating for peace and sanity, for which we love you, by the way, around the world, and that is why we are delighted to have Roger with us today. Listen, it is a great treasure for us to have you on the show today, and just welcome to Daniel Davis Deep Dive.
Pleasure to be here, sir. I've watched you often, so let's get to it.
Let's get to it. Listen, but even before we go, for those who may not have seen, and by the way, the link to that very stirring speech before the United Nations Security Council this past February is in the description, and I recommend anyone to go and take a look at that. But I just have to ask, because obviously you're a world famous rock star, and you've got more money than you'd ever even want to have, and yet you spend a lot of time on making issues like this and talking so passionately about peace. And I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about why that is, because I suspect from what I've heard from other sources here is that your father died in World War II at the Anzio beachhead. I wonder if you can just tell us a little bit about your path.
Well, yeah, my father did die. My father died on February the 18th near a town called Aprila, which is a little bit inland. It was the final push by the Germans to push the bridgehead back into the sea there. So that's obviously, I was 5 months old at the time. So that's a huge influence on my life. My father was Christian, and he'd been a pacifist all his life. And then working as an ambulance driver, because he refused to join the army in 1939 when he was called up. So he drove an ambulance instead. And in his spare time, he was helping in bombed out buildings in the East End of London, which was quite seriously devastated in 1940. And that's where he met my mum, who was also doing voluntary work. She was a tea lady, driving around in a van serving tea to people in air raid shelters. And they both became politicized, some like in the late 30s and also during the Blitz. And so they were both members of the Communist Party. And my father eventually decided that his new political affiliations trumped his love for Jesus Christ and the teachings of the New Testament. So he went back to the conscription board and said, I've changed my mind. And they went, I say, Waters, look, you've got a degree and everything, officer material. So he did his 6 weeks basic training and then officer training. And then he got on a boat, went to North Africa, got off the boat. And then he arrived at Anzio after the landings, and he was killed a couple of weeks later. So that's the story. And it's an heroic story, served as it is by his attachment to Jesus's pacifism, but also to his need to fight capitalism and fascism, as it was exemplified by the Nazis in the Second World War. I could bang on forever, but I'll stop if that's...
Yeah, well, it's absolutely fine. And I wish we could spend the whole time talking about that. I actually, I served in the U.S. Army and served 4 combat deployments myself. And actually, when I was stationed in Europe, actually went to the Anzio beachhead to do kind of a battlefield tour of a lot of the sites in Italy itself. And I often just wondered what it was like to have been there. And gosh, I mean, your father was actually there. That's a sobering thought, actually.
I don't have a good friend because he died last year. He was 101 years old. His name was Harry Schindler. And he was there at the same time my father was, but he was 10 years younger than my father. And they never met or anything. But Harry, after the war, sometime after the war, moved and settled in Italy. And he started something called the Italian Association. And it was Harry Schindler, OBE, who found the spot that my father died on for me.
Oh, wow.
When he'd seen me on Italian television, sort of making an appeal and explaining to people that I was trying to find out where my father was when he died. So yeah, I've made a lot of friends because of this.
And if I can ask, what was that like when you went there the first time?
Deeply moving. There is now a permanent memorial, which I went and unveiled in 2018 to my father in a schoolyard in Aprilia. And there is another memorial way out in the countryside, 200 yards from the Wadi, where he was in the front line. He was in Z Company of the Royal Fusiliers, 8th Battalion, where he was the morning that they were overrun, and they were all either killed or taken prisoner on that morning. So I wrote a song about it. It's called When the Tigers Broke Free. I won't recite it to you, but I could.
Wow. I will most assuredly go find it on my own. I'm really eager to listen to that.
Do. Kind old King George wrote Mother a note when he heard that father was gone. It was, as I recall, in the form of a scroll with gold leaf and all. And I found it one day in a drawer of old photographs hidden away, and my eyes still grow damp to remember His Majesty signed with his own rubber stamp. So you can hear I'm just a tiny bit bitter sometimes about all of this as well. But I remember that. I did find that scroll in the bottom drawer of our chest of drawers in the drawing room, tucked away with all those photographs of Auschwitz that we weren't supposed to look at, because my mother was always a great activist in her own right, first for the Communist Party, and then evidently after 1956, when almost all the members of the Communist Party in England left because the official Communist Party in England refused to condemn the Russian invasion of Hungary in 1956. I know this is all weird stuff that you don't need to know, but it informs my childhood.
Well, yeah, that's why I'm highly interested. That's far from insignificant. That is central, I think, to why you're the activist you are, and that to understand why you hate war so much.
Yeah.
And the one thing that I think distinguishes you from what I've seen, I've looked at a number of speeches you've given over time, and it strikes me that you don't typically like pick one side to hate and one side to love, but you're like saying, I don't want anyone to die. I've seen you do it in the Russia-Ukraine war. I've seen you do it in Palestine areas. And I wonder if you can, I guess, explain what your actual motivation is for not wanting to hate one side or the other, but not wanting anybody to kill the other.
Well, it's funny because you should say that, Danny, because it comes back to my mum. And I've told this story again and again. This is very, very short. When I was about 13 years old, one day I was thinking about something. I've no idea what it was. And my mum looked at me and she thought, that boy's thinking about something. So she took me to one side and said, sit down, so I did. And she said, Roger, all through your life, there will be things that you have to think about and decisions that you have to make. And some of them will be political, some of them will be emotional. It doesn't really matter what it is, but particularly if it's political, here's my advice to you, because I've been through this, she said. When there's something, I want you to read and read and read. Read everything you can, read all the history, acquaint yourself with the facts to the best of your ability, and then read some more. And don't just read what people write who agree with you going into it. Read opposite opinions about it. Really, and when you've done that, you've done all the heavy lifting. That's the hard work done. And I sort of went, well, what do you do then, Mum? I don't get it. And she said, then you do the right thing.
Oh, man, is that great advice?
Yeah, it is great. Isn't that incredible, Danny? My mum said that to me when I was, just looking at girls.
Man,
that's an amazing piece of advice. I've given it to all my children, I promise you. And it's such brilliant advice. I tried to explain it to Piers Morgan, who I did a TV show with, who's never read anything in his life, and neither have most of them. They're blowhards. They're ideologue blowhards. And obviously he has a living to make, and he makes his living by being an arsehole on the TV. But so...
Yeah, I've seen some recent examples of that. So makes good TV, but it doesn't really help the cause any. But
no, it doesn't.
And
so it's, you've started me now. So I'll just go into, I'll only say this one more thing, because so when we see something, you said you were going to talk about Ukraine, good, but when we look at a war like that, with the senseless deaths of hundreds of thousands, as I've pointed out on a number of occasions, you need to look at the why of it. And actually the basic why of it, the main evil, okay, is the need of the Western Empire, well, the Empire of the United States of America, with all its affiliated allies, and most of Europe, that is, because they're the remains of European settler colonialist imperial progress, if you like. They are driven basically by, they're hungry for power and for profit, and that's all, nothing else. So we have to resist the temptation to be diverted by the great words on the Declaration of Independence of your great country, for instance, that all men are created equal and have certain inalienable rights, and that you, the country of the United States, believes in that as a bit. You don't, and you never did. They lied about that, and that is expressed through almost all American foreign policy, certainly since the Second World War. So we have to understand that. So why are all those people dying in Ukraine? Partly because of that, that accounts for all the NATO expansionism after 1989, in further and further and further east, in spite of James Baker's promises and all of that. I know we don't need to go into that because your audience knows all about that, and I know all about it. So that's kind of, we know. So this is the trigger. So it's because we have Victoria Nuland in this world that you and I have to go on TV and say, we don't have to live in Victoria Nuland's world. Victoria Nuland is criminally insane, just like Donald Trump is, and like Joe Biden was, and like Hillary Clinton was, and so on and so on and so back through our recent history. So we're living in a world that is, where the big decisions are made by people who are criminally insane. And that is why we are losing all this human life.
Well, yeah. And I would actually argue slightly that there are a great many Americans who do believe in every word that you just mentioned there about the Declaration of Independence and equality. But there seems to be something happens to the mind, which I think you're onto, when you get up to a position of power. I've seen it firsthand. I've seen it from some of my friends who espouse some of these things until they got into some powerful positions, and then suddenly they turned into whatever it is that you describe, and of all the panoply of people that you just mentioned there. And somehow we've got to, the people who believe in the right thing and in the just thing, to be able to influence, insert their power, whatever they have, to try and mitigate against that, because otherwise we have this carnage we have today.
Yeah, but that's fascinating, isn't it, Danny? Because we all imagine that moment. Say if we're Obama, who some of us admired for some time before he became president of the United States, and you arrive in the office and you sit down and you think, now I can get on with the great work. And somebody taps you on the shoulder and says, right, I'm going to explain a few things now. You have no idea what's going on. You have no idea who runs this country. And you have no idea what you're going to do now. And I'll tell you. And we don't know. We've never been party to that conversation, but we know it happens.
Oh, for sure.
Simple as that, but we know it happens. And they go, oh, well, I'll just try and do the best I can. But what they don't do is follow my mother's advice and do the right thing. The right thing, Obama, is to resign now and say, I'm not doing that because you're asking me to do the wrong thing. So I can't do this job. I am not going to be a murderous puppet for your empire. No.
Well, he didn't have to resign. He just had to stand up and take the office, the power that he had, and tell them to get the hell out of his office. Well, that was leadership that never happened. I can for sure tell you, I observed him all the way through, and there was a palpable change shortly after he got into office. I'm sure what you described there happened. I mean, we see the results of it.
Yeah, I believe you.
Well, listen, it's unfortunately not just an American problem here. I've chose this next soundbite for you to look at because it was made nearly the same time. I think maybe less than 2 weeks after you made that UN Security Council statement. And then you spoke so eloquently about the cost that you see, how it haunts you, et cetera. And then the conclusion was we need to end the war. We need to stop the killing on all sides. That was the path that leads to peace. A few days later, your prime minister made this speech.
And for 3 years, we've been full of admiration for the incredible response of the Ukrainian people. Their voices must be at the heart of the drive for peace. And I want to be clear that I hear them. I think of the soldiers and the civilians that I met in Kyiv just a few weeks ago in the ICU, the burns unit, the witnesses to the horror of Bucha, the school children I met living under constant bombardment, the soldiers training in the UK bound for the front line. Their voices echo in my ears. So we must increase the pressure even further to deliver an enduring peace, not just a pause in the fighting. And we can do that in 3 ways. First, by stepping up our military support to Ukraine. And the UK is doing that, providing £4.5 billion in military aid this year, more than ever before. We're doing more than ever to train Ukrainian troops, helping Ukraine to mobilize even further.
So first of all, when he's reading that, it sounds like he's reading it. When you spoke it, it sounds like it's haunting from your soul. And when he said it sounds like he read a script that someone else wrote that he didn't even have any meaning for. But the crucial part, the difference was you advocated because of those things, the suffering that has been paid, that we need to end the war. His recommendation is we need more war. And I can just tell you from a military perspective, there has never been a military solution for the Ukraine side. And after that was on the 3rd anniversary, he made that statement of the war. To make that statement then, when it's self-evident that there is no military path, all he's doing is condemning more people to those same deaths that he says so moves him.
Yes, he is. But you're right. He's marching to orders. He's saying what he's told to say. It's the same as Boris Johnson going over there in April, whatever it was, April the 9th, 2022, I think it was, shortly after the Russian invasion, when there was peace was on the table, that the Istanbul negotiations had taken place, and that was all ready to go. And Boris Johnson was sent in to say, nope, we've decided no. Our masters in Washington have decided that this is convenient to us. It'll weaken the Russian Federation, and it's very good for all those of us who invest in armaments industries, not just in the United States of America, in Raytheon and Lockheed and Grumman and all those others, but also in the UK and building bits for Elbit systems. And all. It's bloody good business. So you are not making peace. Shut up. And so he did. So, because Zelensky just does as he's told, he always has. He promised one thing before he was elected, which was that he was going to implement the Accords. Well, I've forgotten what they were called now, but
the Minsk Accords.
Exactly, the Minsk Accords. He was going to implement it, and he became the president, and he made no move ever at any point to implement it because he was told, "No, we're not doing that. You do as you're told." And we all know this. So this absurd war has been. And by the way, the idiot and the awful lying swine Starmer, who's the Prime Minister of the UK, mentions Bucha, which has now been totally discredited, and what we all thought was the reality of it all those years ago, it turns out is. And it's come, funnily enough, from people who were acting. No, they weren't service, they were attached to the UN, but they witnessed it all. They witnessed the laying out of freshly dead bodies with, very clean linen ties behind their backs, and that the West and the propaganda machines, the anti-Russian propaganda machine, pretended were massacres made by the Russian army before they withdrew from Bucha, whenever. And The evidence is incontrovertible now that did not happen, that those people died later and that they were laid out on the street. And if you can look into it as much as you want. I've looked into it, Piers. By the way, Piers, I hope you're paying attention to this. Go and actually look into it. Or even you, Keir Starmer, you claim to be the Prime Minister of England and you know nothing. You're completely ignorant. So it was very difficult for me to listen to that speech of Keir Starmer's.
Yeah, it was hard for us to play it, and I'll just add on to what you just said. I have personally spoken to people, two of them who were on the ground at the time. One was a Spaniard, and the other one was a Brit, actually, who was working for the UN, and they both corroborated exactly what you said, that it was all staged. And of course, almost nobody in the West, certainly not in the United States, believes that. But as you say, if you just read and look at things, then the truth is there to be seen for anybody who wants to. And that sabotage piece, and here's the perverted thing of all that, is that because that took hold and was accepted as fact, hundreds of thousands of more Ukrainians are dead today that would never have died if that peace had come into a fort. And I always say, if you say you support Ukraine, then you should be the first one to refute that absurdity.
Yeah, you should. But the way the game is played, the powers that be lie, and they lie and lie and lie and lie and lie, and that is the game, and it's kind of the whole game. And they're never called up on their lie. They're never. So I know we're going to talk about Palestine at some point, but so all the lies about Palestine, not just October the 7th and the beheaded babies and the rapes and the oven, which were all complete lies. Not a shred of evidence has come up to support any of those lies. And let's not forget, President Biden at the time said, I have photographs of beheaded babies in my hand. He went to that extent to protect. He was actually looking at real evidence. And so, but we now know all that, but it's all still gets shoveled to one side. So the people who are trying harder than anyone else in the world to silence me, which is the Zionists all over the world.
Well, yeah, and actually, I wanted to ask you to explain something here, because my understanding is that you gave a concert in Buenos Aires in 2023, and this world famous guy, this massive stadium just packed out with people, and yet you couldn't get a hotel room. Can you explain what happened with that?
Yeah, I think yes, that's Israeli lobby pressure. There's one particular guy whose name I can't remember. It's a Russian name, but he owns the whole of the Four Seasons chain. There is a chain of Four Seasons hotels all over the world. And it may be that I was booked into a Four Seasons in Buenos Aires. But anyway, he made it quite clear at the time, Roger Waters is not allowed to stay in a Four Seasons hotel anywhere in the world ever. Why? Because he's an anti-Semite. And that's it. That's it. But I couldn't find a hotel. Thankfully, not a friend of mine, but a friend of a friend lent me an apartment. But I only stayed in BA for one night. That was, or 2 nights. We did two shows in BA. So I stayed there for 2 nights. But for the preceding 10 days, I was in a private residence outside Montevideo in Uruguay, because no hotel in Uruguay would let me stay. And the Uruguay, interestingly enough, in Montevideo, 2 years before I had toured, and I was given the keys to the city. I was feted. I was given great honor. They had meetings and they said, it's so wonderful you're here, and for all the work you do for love and peace and blah, 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 all over the world, and da, 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 we'd like you to accept the freedom of the city of Montevideo. And 2 years later, they wouldn't let me stay in a hotel. So that's how powerful the Israeli lobby is. Their tentacles spread everywhere. But the good thing, Danny, is the only good thing about the tragedy that's going on now in Gaza and all over the West Bank and in East Jerusalem and the whole of occupied Palestine is that they have finally taken off their masks. So when Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu sit in the Oval Office in Washington, D.C., and talk about Gaza as if it's a piece of real estate and how they're going to give the people of Gaza a choice. You can either leave voluntarily or we'll kill you all. Well, men, women, children, newborn babies, especially newborn babies. The mask is now off. And the world, we, the peoples of the United Nations of the world, the huge majority of us, billions of us, are disgusted by Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu and everyone else who is feeding this genocide there, here, everywhere. And we are taking to the streets. And you may not see it. Certainly if you live in America, you won't see it on your TV sets and things, or only just for, but the demonstrations every single day are huge.
And in fact, it's also on the fortunate side, it is starting to seep in to some officialdom here. In fact, here just a few days ago was a Cypriot member of the European Union who talked about the moral compass, or the lack thereof, of the West.
The moral compass of the EU is completely broken. Since 2022, the EU has sent 138 billion euros to Ukraine in military and humanitarian aid. We have cut diplomatic ties with Russia and imposed the biggest amount of sanctions in history, a quite clear and powerful response. On the other hand, when it comes to Palestine, our stance is completely different. The Israeli government is conducting a brutal genocide, and the people are even starving to death due to the blockade the last 2 months. Despite all of this, the EU maintains normal relations with Israel. No big sanctions, no cutting diplomatic ties. Many EU leaders met with Netanyahu, like the president of my country, Cyprus, recently did. But none of you will even consider to meet and just talk with Putin. So just let me ask you, where is our moral consistency? Thank you. I love you all.
So that's a pretty strong denunciation that even Trump, for his flaws, is at least willing to talk to Putin to try to bring that to an end. But nobody else in the European Union would, but they have no problem having big applause and meetings with Netanyahu every day. How do you see that contradiction?
Well, it shows that the guy from Cyprus was completely right, and the moral compass has collapsed as far as Western civilization is concerned. So that meeting in the Oval Office with Donald Trump and Netanyahu shows the complete moral collapse, degradation of the Western world, right there in front of your eyes, actually happening. And it doesn't matter it matters what happens in the Ukraine if you're a Ukrainian, or anybody who cares about the deaths of soldiers and cares about their families, like I said in the Security Council in February or whatever. But in the big picture, you can say, oh, well, Trump's trying to make peace with Putin, and through Trump is committing genocide in Gaza. That's all you need to know. So are we. Keir Starmer is, my country is, all right? So is Macron. So are the Dutch and the Norwegians, and anybody who isn't standing up against it, anyone who is not in the street, anyone who is not smashing the windows at Elbit Systems is standing with it. There are only two sides in this, right? There is good and evil in the world, and anybody who is complicit in any way in the genocide of our brothers and sisters in Palestine is bad, evil. And anybody who says nada más, we have to stop them doing this, and takes to the streets, those millions and millions of them in the Yemen, in those demonstrations, they are in the right. There is right, and the Ukraine is a sideshow. We can talk about that, and it's very important, particularly if you're Ukraine. What people don't say about Ukraine, which I try and say as often as I can, Ukraine is a deeply divided country, and it always was. because it's a conglomerate. It's not it was never a real country. In 1956, when Khrushchev gave it at least a semblance of sovereignty, though it was always written into their constitution that there would always be a Russian military presence in the Crimea because of the warm water ports and all. We all know this, Piers Morgan. Anybody can read knows all this. You did get me started, and I can talk.
I did.
My thing with Ukraine is I had a friend there called Alina, a woman with a dog. She didn't have a dog; she had a cat. But I was writing emails. She was 18 years old, and I got an email back from her right at the beginning, where she said that you've got one thing wrong, where you say there are Nazis in Kiev. That is 200% untrue. There is not a single Nazi in the Ukraine. And this is a young woman who's just innocent enough to believe that nonsense. She'd never heard of the right sector or the Azov battalions or any of the rest. Knows nothing about it. The fact is that the nation is divided into the followers of Stefan Bandera, and who are mainly in Kiev and in the Western Ukraine, and a large majority of the people who live in the 4 oblasts that are Eastern Ukraine, i.e. Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson, and Zaprovnovia, or whatever it is, and maybe even
Zaporizhia.
Yeah, they speak Russian, and they look upon themselves as native Russians. And they're all Russian Orthodox Christians, and they're all this and that and the other. So it's a bit like Ireland was. It's a bit like the Protestant Catholic thing, and certainly a bit like the artificial divisions of the land. Let's not go into Ireland, because we would be here all. But
Right.
Take my point. The point is, wise men, if you put you and me, okay, and Jeffrey Sachs and maybe Meir Sharma and possibly even those blokes from Cyprus, interestingly enough, what are they called? It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I've forgotten their names. But Anthony, what's his name? It doesn't matter. We would solve it in a heartbeat. We just said, well, obviously there's these people who live over here and they want one thing, and these people who live over. Well, you can't have the Nazis who live over there killing all the people who speak Russian. Which is what they wanted to do after 2014, and started to do it by artillery bombardments in the Donbass. That's why the Russians started what they call their special military operation, and what the Americans call the invasion, the illegal invasion, the unprovoked. This was so as soon as they say unprovoked, you go,
yeah, you know they're lying.
Read anything. You don't know anything about. You cannot get a greater provocation than whenever Putin or Lavrov says, this is a red line. Niet means niet. It was one of your diplomatic or a general in the American army. Burns, his name was, W. James Burns or something. He wrote back. He wrote a memo. I've seen it. It says niet means niet. When the Russians say that niet means, they mean it. Well, this is all we're looking at, is them being so stupid.
Which kind of circles back around to your contention at the first. This is not about right and wrong. This is not about who was in the bad side here, but all about perpetuating the war for money.
For money.
And it's hard for a regular person to understand that the mind of somebody who's wealthy could actually do that, because it is so far away from any kind of moral foundation, just as a normal human being.
Yeah.
But yet the evidence is pretty strong that that's exactly what does happen.
Yes, it is. And the fact is that their side of the argument, including Piers Morgan, try and sell the idea that Putin is the new Hitler and that the Russians are monsters. And there is that good and evil, but we're the good guys and we're the white hats and they're the black hats. And it's complete nonsense, as we know.
Right. I want to circle back to the Palestinian issue here, and I want to ask your opinion on something about the causes and the reasons why people have some of the views that they do. I am a born-again Christian. I'm a follower of Jesus Christ, and it is profoundly disturbing and confusing to me why so many of my co-religionists here in the United States turn a complete and total blind eye to the profound suffering of women and children. Apparently, there's up to 30,000 Palestinian children who have been killed in this war. The entire strip has been denuded to the point to where all they can do now is exist, even if they can survive this starvation issue that the Israelis are going. But yet, when anywhere else in the world, if there was a government that was literally starving an entire people group and depriving them of any food, the whole world would rise up against them, to include us. But yet somehow, if it's the Israeli government, then even though there's some of our, because there are plenty of people in the Gaza Strip that are also Christian brothers and sisters that are the same as us, and yet we seem to care nothing about them and just turn a blind eye to it. So my question is, since you've suffered from some of this too, like the deal in Buenos Aires, why do so many people have this blindness because of Israel? And you can't just say their money, because there's a lot of groups that have money, but there's something different about Israel, that they have this mastery over so many of the populations in the West.
In the speech that I made to the conference that was held for the 80th, is it 80th now? Anniversary of the Yalta conference in the Crimea, okay, I made this point, and I think it's very relevant to what you say. And I have to choose my words carefully, given that you're an evangelical Christian, because I'm never quite sure exactly what that means. But we do know that there are, certainly in some areas of that community in the United States, they believe, some of them, I'm not saying you, but some people believe in the rapture. So one gets the feeling that some of them are almost egging on Armageddon, and they can't think of anything better really than that Armageddon happens, and it has to happen in the Middle East, and the Israelis have to have been, according to the ancient scriptures, so I'm told. I've never been a great reader of ancient scriptures, but so this is my theory, and I actually put this out in my Yalta speech, which anybody can find on Instagram if they want. And it is this, that those scriptures were borrowed from in the 15th and 16th century, when we, the European imperialists, invaded North and South America and murdered everyone that we could get our hands on. Everyone. Okay. Never mind the slavery and how all of that happened. And when we did, when the Pilgrim Fathers arrived on Plymouth Rock in 1640 or whenever it was, up there, up the north, never mind what the Brazilians and the Spanish did in Central America and so, our lot arrived up there. They believed this was Zion. Okay, so they borrowed from the Hebrew texts, from the Old Testament of the Bible, and or from the Torah. And this idea that there is this God, Judeo-Christian God, who's all the same bloke, but that he loves land for the people he chooses. And that, so you have a carte blanche given the manifest destiny of the Mayflower and the Pilgrim Fathers, and the fact that they were Protestant, but also they were Puritans. So you have a moral authority to kill everyone who's there, and that is what they proceeded to do. So this lies somewhere at the heart of it, because this has never been accepted by American society. And so clearly in 1776, when they wrote the Declaration of Independence and said, we believe all men are created equal, except the Indians, of course, and the black, and the slaves. Apart from them, we're all created. What they meant was all white and all wasps are created equal, and the rest of you can, because you're nobody, you're nothing, you're vermin, you're cockroaches, you're irrelevant. How do you know that? God told us so. So with all due respect to your love for Jesus Christ, and I completely understand that, because if Jesus did exist, he was probably a really good bloke, because a lot of apostles and people, wrote gospels according to them. And he said a lot of great things. All that stuff about throwing the moneylenders out of the temple. How appropriate is that when people are making vast fortunes out of dropping 2,000-pound bombs on babies in the Holy Land? I don't know. So forgive me if I get a bit over-egged again, but that's what I think it is. It's this attachment to the Holy Scripts and the idea that there is an Almighty who is vengeful and land hungry. Because this, if you take that out of the equation, Danny, and say, yes, I worship this God, but not if he's vengeful and land hungry. Not if he believes in the principles of Zionism, which is that God is allowed to choose a small group of people, and if he does, they get to kill everyone else in the world. That is so disgusting and such arrant nonsense. And
Well,
this is what we've tried to civilize ourselves away from.
And you use the right word, errant, because as someone who has studied the scriptures intently, I can tell you the bastardization of them to come to those conclusions is a radical misreading of what's there, but it has happened throughout the centuries. I don't dispute that at all, but the true people who have actually read it are horrified by what's happening here because God is in control of those things. He never gave anybody authorization to take land from somebody else and kill somebody for especially not in the United States, but yet that's what it was for.
Well, Ben Gvir would argue with that point with you.
Yeah, and I'd love to have that argument because I can show in the scripture how he's wrong. But the issue though is even for the evangelicals themselves. And by the way, I call myself a born again believer, not an evangelical, because that comes with other tags that don't belong on me. But even some of those, they seem to favor the government, the civil government of Israel over their co-religionists who were supposed to be going to the same Jesus. That's the part I don't get.
Okay. Well, brother, I don't get it either. All we can do, you and I, Danny, is what we're doing, which is wake up every morning and try and do something and be there and never look away. And never step down from the barricades, and never let the Zionist lobby get under my skin, and never give them an inch, not a single inch, ever. And to applaud my friends in Palestine Action in the UK, destroying factories that are colluding with the British government and with the Israeli government to murder my brothers and sisters in Palestine, and never to flinch, never look away. Because I know my brothers on the front line out there in the streets marching. Every Saturday they march in England, and they do almost all over the world. And we will join all our voices together in harmony, and the sound of that choir will win in the end, because love and truth in the end, and I know you believe this because of your attachment to Jesus Christ, love and truth will always trump lies and hatred. So
I do.
And
I do
we have
that.
both love and truth in our grasp. So we shall overcome. To quote
and how do you perceive or what would you say to people that say, oh well, you or any of these people, they're pro Hamas and you're anti-Semitic? That's the one that's almost always tossed around that makes people afraid to have this position that you do.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I think it's Article 12 of the British Terrorist Act. So every time I go back to England, which I have done a couple of times in the last year, I went for the general election and I went again for a charity evening for Al-Haq to raise some money for the cause of blah, blah. And whenever I go through the airport, I think, I wonder if they're going to arrest me. Because what I say is clearly Hamas is very good point. There is a great movement going on in the United Kingdom now, a legal attempt by good guys to make the UK drop what Priti Patel did in 2021 she did this, where she said Hamas is a terrorist organization, not just the armed wing. Because Hamas itself as an organization have said, if any of our men murdered a single civilian on October the 7th, we condemn it unreservedly as a war crime. Hamas, that's official. Now, do you want to lock me up because I've said that? Look it up, Piers. That is Hamas's official position. A lot of people got out behind Hamas when those prison walls were breached, and I have no doubt that many of them committed heinous crimes. Like I've no doubt some of them killed civilians. Did they burn babies? No. Did they murder babies? Did they behead babies? No. Did they kill babies? No. Did they rape women? No. But I'm sure they killed the odd bloke who stood up in front of them, and it's a war crime, and they should be called to justice. Yes. Did the Israelis issue a Hannibal directive and without question murder hundreds of civilians and Palestinians with Hellfire missiles? Yes, they did. The evidence is all there. You can't look at the piles of burned out cars. And also they're on film. That bloke standing there said, then we fired tank shells into this building and we killed 65 people and 38 of them were Israelis. And he admits it on film. And the people who are there saying, oh, they put babies in ovens, who were Zaka, we know now who they are. They were lying through their teeth. There's no evidence to support any of their stories. They were being paid by the Israeli government to lie. So I'm sorry to get overwrought, but this is all so simple. Hamas was the duly elected government of Palestine and has been since 2006. Okay, so when you see the machine trying to say it's Hamas's fault, Hamas are responsible for the killing of these. No, they're not. You are Donald Trump. You are Joe Biden. You are Benjamin Netanyahu. You are responsible for the killing of them. You are the ones dropping 2,000-pound bombs on them all day and night and then pretending to have a ceasefire for 5 minutes and then breaking the ceasefire and starting. You are the ones committing genocide, and you are getting away with it because not quite enough of we, the people, are standing up on the barricades and going, no more. I've just written a new piece, and the headline, I haven't recorded it yet, but I probably will today and put it out. And it's called, it says, what the world needs now is bigger cojones. And that's why I believe we need bigger balls. We need to be louder in our denunciation of this genocide.
Well, and it couldn't have come at a more opportune moment because, as Benjamin Netanyahu just said a couple of days ago, they're going back into Gaza.
בלילה ישבנו עד שעה מאוחרת בקבינט והחלטנו על פעולה עצימה בעזה. זו הייתה המלצת הרמטכ"ל, ללכת, כפי שהוא אמר, להכרעה של החמאס, ובדרך הוא חושב שזה יסייע לנו גם לחלץ את החטופים, ואני מסכים איתו, אנחנו לא מרפים מהמאמץ הזה ולא נוותר על אף אחד. תהיה הנאה של האוכלוסייה כדי להגן עליה. דבר אחד יהיה ברור, לא ייכנסו ויצאו. נגייס מילואים כדי שיבואו יתפסו שטח, אנחנו יוצאים מהשטח, רק אנחנו עושים פשיטות ממה שנשאר, אנחנו לא שם, זו לא הכוונה.
אוקיי.
הכוונה הפוכה.
I can just tell you categorically from a military perspective, there is no efficacy in what he's talking about. They're not going in to defeat Hamas. They're going in to destroy the buildings more and kill anybody else who gets in the way. So there is no truth to that. But now then, it appears that the United States is fully supportive of it.
Well, where's the surprise, Danny? Where's the surprise in that? You know, Trump clearly is a lunatic. You know, and he just is. Everything he's doing domestically, never mind the foreign policy, never mind committing this genocide without turning a hair. He literally, when he talks about it as a real, he thinks he's being clever. We can build a golf course. You know, I could give it to Jared, and he's a good, you know, he knows about real estate. Fuck you, you murdering swine. These are people's family. These are people's families. Their grandfathers and grandmothers and aunts and uncles and cousins and children and babies, you know, and you're talking about it, that you can build a resort there. It's their land. They've been there for thousands of years. And it was it was actually quite a wonderful civilization. Yeah, did they have wars? Yeah. Was it ruled by the Ottoman Empire? Yeah, it was. Did they murder everybody? No, they didn't. Did the Jews live there happily alongside everybody else? Yes, they did. They killed one, your bloke, but they were just one of the religions. There was the Abrahamic religion was there as well. And they lived alongside the Druze and the Christians and the Muslims and the agnostics and the atheists and they all lived together. It's only since 1948, well, they started it in the middle of the 19th century, planning it all.
Yeah.
They've said, no, we are a white, Judeo-exclusive, supremacist. We pretend we're a democracy, but obviously we're not. If you're not a Jew, you can't go on the roads, okay? We understood. In fact, if you're not a Jew, you can't live. There we are. End of story. We'll kill you. We're going to kill you because God said we could. He chose us to kill you. So that's what we're doing. So
yeah. Again,
I know I'm getting a bit dramatic, but this is the actual reality.
Well, I know. I mean, you have I would like to say it's an over dramatization, but you have the likes of Ben Gvir and Smotrich and sometimes Netanyahu himself saying with their own mouths even worse than what you're saying. So it's not an exaggeration. In the last few minutes that we have of time here, what can people do? Because, a lot of people are going to listen to this and they're going to go, yeah, I agree with you, but what can I do? I'm just a guy. What would you say to people? Get out in the streets. Go and sit down somewhere. Let the fascist police arrest you in the campus. Fight back against in the United States of America specifically. But this is true all over Europe as well. I have friends who've been arrested in England and Germany and Holland and whatever, because all of those governments have banded together and said and agreed with the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism that any criticism of Israel and its politics is inherently anti-Semitic and is hate speech, and we will look you up for it. What? This was 2019, the AHRA, the International Holocaust something or other Alliance, Remembrance Alliance, a new definition. And 7 of the 11 articles are to do with criticism of Israel. So suddenly it's being anti-Semitic is no longer having an irrational or rational, depends how you look upon it, dislike of Jewish people and criticizing them or treating them badly or something, which is what anti-Semitism used to mean. Now it means any criticism of the most horrific, insane, criminally insane, lunatic state in the world, Israel, which believes in mass extermination of anyone who is not Jewish. And what do they say to those people? Because you talk about protest. I mean, if you look hard, you can find there are huge protests that happen inside Israel by Jews, and that's been at our campuses here in the United States as well.
Yeah.
Very deeply committed Jews who are protesting against this.
Yeah.
Are they anti-Semites? I mean, how does that work?
Obviously not. No, it's absurd. The whole thing is absurd. I'm having a drink with one of them later, Katie Halper, who you must know from Useful Idiots.
I am. She's going to be on our show very soon, actually.
Well, she's going to be in my drawing room having a glass of white wine with me in about 2 hours from now. Oh, no, a bit longer.
Give her my regards.
We have to wait, Danny, until the sun is over the yardarm, and we will. But, yeah, no, of course, everybody knows it's nonsense. Everything that comes out of, oh, Christ, who's that? Jonathan Greenblatt, who runs the ADL. Now that Abe Foxman, my old friend, retired about 15 years ago, I thought I was going to be arguing with Abe Foxman for the rest of my life. No, he's retired. So he's left me Jonathan Greenblatt. What a moron he is, and what an absolute prick. You know, he tried to get me to have lunch with him about 2 years ago. You know what they do? If they see somebody like me who cares about right and wrong and truth, and things like that, they sometimes try and cozy up to them. Why don't we have lunch and talk this thing through? And then what they try and convince you of, I didn't have lunch and I'm not going to. But what they've said in letters to me is, if you could modify your position, in fact, if you could sort of withdraw from your difficult positions or whatever, we would try to rehabilitate you in opinion of the whatever, so that you can go on plying your filthy trade as a bass player or whatever you do, and all you can do is laugh and go, Greenblatt, are you insane? And you don't have to say that, because he is insane, obviously, and he's a bear of very, very little brain, because this conversation is not hard to have. It's not complicated, Danny. As you know and I know, there is right and there is wrong, and it doesn't matter if you get your moral compass from Jesus Christ or if you get it from other places, like I do. It's still a moral compass, and murdering babies is wrong in every possible moral compass, and all Jews believe that, worth the name. So you are on your own, David Greenblatt. You are a murdering swine. And
I tell you, Roger, I think that the time is the pendulum is already swinging, and your actions are certainly helping to move it back in the right direction. But that the time is going to come when that gets stripped away. And what I fear is, and what some of my other Jewish friends fear, is that it'll swing so far back in the other direction, there'll be blowback, and the very people who have fostered this stuff are going to pay a price later on. And I don't wish that on anybody, but they're part of the engine that's going to be bringing that to bear. And I rue the day that happens.
What do you mean, that we'll be hanging them from lampposts?
Well, I certainly don't hope it goes that far.
I don't want to hang anybody from a lamppost.
No, absolutely not. Totally against it. I fear, though, that they will face a backlash when the pendulum swings back over. Well,
I hope they do, Danny. I hope they feel a backlash. And I hope that if we're there in the front line, Danny, you and I, that we're kinder to them than they are to all those babies they're murdering now. Yeah. And that we go, listen, we get it. You made a mistake. Zionism was always wrong. You're wrong about God wanting you to steal somebody's land, and God giving you permission to murder them if they don't give you their land, if they don't move off to go and live in somewhere or other, Jordan or Egypt or the Sinai Desert. You're wrong about that. That is wrong. But now that now that you're not murdering them anymore, and now that they have a chance to rebuild their country with all of their culture that they always had, the people of Palestine allowed to grow their olives, to tend their flocks, right? To drink the water from their wells, to live life with their families, with their children and their grandchildren, to celebrate their festivals, to give away their money and their things and their food and share everything during Ramadan, as they all do every year during that, and so on and so forth. When that comes to pass, then Danny and I will be happy. We'll be happy to sit here and stop raising our voices. But until that time happens, we will be encouraging all our activist brothers and sisters all over the world to take to the barricades, not just to the streets. We have to see the streets as our barricades, all right? And to stand there and take their slings and arrows. We have to stand up to Goliath, even if he is armed with 2,000-pound bombs. We have to be David with our slingshot until what you've just said happens. And when the boot is on the other foot, we will not kick you to death like you are trying to kick us to death and kicking our brothers and sisters in Palestine to death.
Incredibly well said.
But we will encourage you to sit quietly somewhere and think it through, and hopefully find some love and truth in your heart, and stop behaving like the criminally insane arseholes that you are now.
Well, listen, on that note there, I couldn't think of a better way to end today's show. Thank you so much, Roger Waters. What a fabulous, really just enunciation of what moral right looks like, and how everyone has validity and deserves to be living in nonviolence. It seems odd to have to say that out loud, but it is. And I'm so grateful for you coming on the show today to share those views.
It's been a pleasure. Great to meet you after all this time.
Same here. It's a truly pleasure. Thank you very much for coming on, and we will see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.